The Hells Angels biker watched the little girl brush dust off a Footlocker, and the secret inside rewrote his lineage. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. On a cold autumn afternoon, Jake Reaper Morrison, a Hells Angels biker with a reputation for fearlessness and intimidation, was passing through a small town on his way to nowhere. His leather jacket was worn, his face rugged from years on the road, and his Harley-Davidson roared like a lion in the quiet streets. But as he was about to turn onto a forgotten side street, something caught his eye. A little girl, no older than 7, was standing by an old, dusty Footlocker in front of an abandoned house. The sight was odd enough to make him slow down. He watched as the child, her blonde hair in a messy ponytail, bent down to brush dust off the Footlocker. Her small hands moved carefully, as if uncovering something precious, yet invisible to anyone else. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had seen countless things in his life, but this was different. He pulled his bike to the side of the road and killed the engine, the rumble of the Harley fading into the silence around him. The little girl didn't seem to notice him at first. She continued her task with a quiet intensity, oblivious to the world around her. Jake, though, couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something about the way she moved, so delicate and focused, that made him pause. Then, just as he was about to turn and ride away, the girl stood up suddenly, her hands still hovering over the Footlocker. She looked up at him, her wide eyes locking onto his, and she said, "I found it. I think it's for you." Jake blinked, confused. He had never met this child before in his life, but something in her gaze made him want to listen. He got off his bike and walked toward her, a mixture of suspicion and curiosity in his chest. "What's for me?" he asked, his voice gruff from years of smoking and shouting over the roar of engines. The little girl didn't speak, but instead moved to the Footlocker and gently lifted the lid. Inside, there was nothing extraordinary, just old papers, a few rusty tools, and a small box. But when Jake leaned in closer, he noticed something else. A picture, yellowed with age, tucked beneath a stack of papers. The photo was of a man, older than Jake, but with the same piercing eyes and rugged features. And there was something else in the picture. A small note, barely legible, scribbled in the corner. "To the one who will carry the legacy." Jake's heart raced. He didn't know what this meant, but he knew one thing. This little girl had just handed him a piece of his own past, something he had never expected to find. His lineage. The secret he had never known. He looked back at the girl, who was now looking up at him with an unreadable expression. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice softer now, tinged with wonder. The girl just smiled, a sad, knowing smile, before turning and walking away. Jake stood there, holding the picture in his hands, the weight of it settling over him. What had just happened? What was this secret, and why was it buried in this small town, hidden in a forgotten Footlocker? With a deep breath, he knew one thing for sure. His life had just changed forever. And as he watched the little girl disappear into the distance, he realized he was about to uncover a truth that would rewrite everything he knew about who he was, and who he was meant to be. I had to pause for a moment, letting the weight of the picture sink in. What had I just found? My heart was racing in my chest, a strange mix of disbelief and curiosity stirring inside me. The little girl was gone, vanishing into the distance without a word, leaving me standing in the middle of the road, holding a picture that had just changed everything. It was as if the past I'd buried so deep had come rushing back in a flash, and now, it was demanding to be uncovered. What legacy? What secret had been hidden for so long? I turned the photo over in my hands again. But there was no answer, just that cryptic note. "To the one who will carry the legacy." What did it mean? My instincts told me this was no accident, no random encounter. It was as if fate itself had led me to this moment. Without a second thought, I mounted my Harley, the bike roaring to life beneath me. I wasn't leaving until I had answers. I sped down the old, empty streets, the wind cutting through my leather jacket, my mind spinning with questions. The girl's face kept flashing in my mind, her strange calmness, and the way she had known exactly where to find me, what to give me. I pulled into the driveway of the old house where she'd been standing. The house was in poor shape, the paint peeling off the wood like old scars, the yard overgrown with weeds. It looked like no one had lived there for years. I got off the bike and approached the front door. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I wasn't ready for what I found. The door was cracked open, and inside, the air was thick with dust and mildew. I stepped inside, the creaky floorboards groaning beneath my weight. Everything was just as it had been when I first saw it. Old furniture covered in sheets, forgotten belongings stacked in corners. But there was something about the place, something eerie. As I moved through the rooms, I felt it, an unmistakable presence, like someone, or something, was watching me. I walked down a narrow hallway, the air heavy with the smell of decay. At the end of the hallway, I found another door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into a small room. There, in the center, was a dusty old trunk. The same kind of trunk you'd expect to see in a movie. A giant, worn chest, old-fashioned locks rusting in place. It looked almost out of place in a house that had been abandoned for so long. But something about it seemed important. I moved toward it, my heart pounding. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The picture in my hands, the girl's words, all of it pointed to this moment. I crouched down and reached for the lock. It was old, but still functional. My hands were steady, despite the adrenaline rushing through me. I unlocked it and lifted the lid. Inside I found a pile of old letters, some yellowed with age, others barely holding together. There were more photos too, some of them faded and hard to make out, others clear as day. I sifted through them, each one telling a story I didn't understand. And then, hidden at the bottom, was a small, sealed envelope. I opened it carefully, feeling a sense of urgency building inside me. What was this? What was in this envelope that had been hidden for so long? Inside, there was another picture. But this one was different. It wasn't a person, it was a map. A map of the very land I was standing on, with certain areas marked in red ink. My breath caught in my throat. This map was more than just a guide, it was a treasure map. And I knew, deep down, that the legacy the girl had spoken of was here, hidden somewhere in this very house. I grabbed the map and stood up, my mind racing. I had to find it. I couldn't stop now. I had come too far. But as I turned to leave the room, I heard something, a faint noise, like footsteps, coming from the back of the house. I froze. My eyes darted toward the hallway. Was I alone here? Or had someone else found this secret before me? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to leave until I uncovered the truth, no matter who or what stood in my way. I took a deep breath, the map in my hand trembling slightly as I processed what had just happened. I had come looking for answers, and now, here I was, holding the key to something bigger than I could have ever imagined. My eyes scanned the map again, the red markings making my pulse quicken. This was no ordinary treasure map. It was a map of this very house, the surrounding land, and several locations marked in a language I didn't recognize. The girl's cryptic words echoed in my mind. I think it's for you. But what was I supposed to do with this information? I wasn't a treasure hunter. I wasn't even sure if there was any treasure at all. But I knew one thing. This was no coincidence. The legacy she had spoken of, it was real, and I needed to find it. Without another moment's hesitation, I tucked the map into my jacket pocket and stepped out of the room. The house seemed even quieter now, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I moved cautiously through the hallway, every creak of the floorboards sounding louder than usual. I stopped at the front door, scanning the yard outside. The world seemed to hold its breath as I stood there. I was alone, or so I thought. The footsteps I had heard earlier, they weren't in my head. Someone, or something, was here with me. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get back on my bike and ride off, but I couldn't. Not yet. I had to see this through. I stepped outside, looking around the overgrown yard. The old house sat at the edge of town, surrounded by dense trees and wild, untamed land. It looked like a place that had been forgotten by time. But I knew better. I could feel it now. This place, this house, it held secrets. And whatever those secrets were, they were buried out there, just waiting to be uncovered. I started walking toward the back of the house, my boots crunching on the dry leaves. The further I went, the more the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was wrong. I could sense it, like the air itself had changed. That's when I saw it. A small shack, hidden behind a thicket of trees. It was barely noticeable, the the roof covered in moss, the walls leaning as if they had been forgotten by time, much like the house. The map, folded in my pocket, seemed to burn against my side, urging me forward. I knew this was where I needed to be. I walked toward the shack, my steps slow but deliberate. As I got closer, with age, and covered in thick layers of dust. This was it. This was what I had been looking for. I walked toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. The chest was locked, but there was a keyhole. I looked around, searching for anything that might open it. That's when I saw it. Half buried under a pile of old newspapers, a key. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hand. It was small, but it felt significant, like it had been waiting for me. I inserted the key into the chest, and with a soft click, it opened. Inside, I found what I had been searching for. More pictures, more letters, and a journal. The journal was worn, the leather cover cracked and faded, but it felt like it held the answers I had been looking for. I flipped it open, the pages yellowed with age, and began to read. The first few pages were filled with details about a family I didn't recognize. But as I turned the pages, the names started to sound familiar. The more I read, the more I realized the truth. I wasn't just connected to this house. I was connected to something much larger. This journal belonged to my great-grandfather, the very man whose picture I had seen earlier. The legacy the little girl had spoken of, it was my legacy, and it had been hidden here, in this very shack, for decades. The truth about my family, the history I never knew, it was all here. And now, it was mine to uncover. I sat there, the journal in my hands, my mind reeling with the weight of what I had just uncovered. My great-grandfather, a man I had never known, had been at the center of it all. The letters, the photos, they all pointed to a family secret, one that had been buried for generations. I needed to know more. I turned the pages slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of a past that had been hidden for so long. The journal detailed the history of a family tied to something far greater than I could have ever imagined. There were mentions of hidden treasures, secret meetings, and a network of people who had all played a part in this legacy. But what struck me the most was the name that appeared again and again, the Brotherhood. It wasn't just any family. It was a powerful group of individuals, each bound by an unspoken code. A code that my great-grandfather had been a part of. But why was it hidden? Why had he kept this part of his life a secret from everyone, including his own family? The answers were in the journal, but the deeper I read, the more questions I had. There were mentions of betrayal, of people who had been silenced, and of a dangerous game being played. And then, in the final pages, I found it, a map. But not just any map. This one was different. It was a map of the city, marked with several locations, each one crossed out with bold red X's. The last X, however, was circled in blue ink, and it was right here, in this town. My heart raced. This was no coincidence. The journal, the map, and the mysterious Footlocker had all led me to this point. I had uncovered the beginning of a mystery that went beyond just my family. It was something bigger, something dangerous. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. I had walked into a world I didn't understand, and I was starting to realize just how much I didn't know. But there was no turning back now. The blue circle on the map was calling me. I had to go there. I had to see what was hidden in that place. I grabbed the journal and shoved it back into my bag, my mind racing with thoughts of what I might find. I walked out of the shack, my eyes scanning the surrounding area. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the land. It was beautiful, but the beauty didn't fool me. I knew the darkness was lurking just beneath the surface. As I started walking back toward my bike, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every sound, every rustle of leaves seemed louder than usual. I couldn't tell if it was just my nerves or if someone was really out there, but I knew I couldn't take any chances. I mounted the bike and started the engine. The familiar rumble beneath me was a small comfort as I pulled away from the shack, heading for the location marked on the map. The road was empty, the town quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. It was a long ride, but I finally reached the spot marked on the map. It was a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. It looked abandoned, but I knew better. This was the place. I parked my bike a few hundred feet away, making sure to stay out of sight. The air was thick with tension as I approached the building, every step feeling heavier than the last. I reached the door and paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. What was I about to find? I pushed the door open slowly, the rusted hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the darkness was overwhelming, but I could just make out the outline of old machinery and crates stacked against the walls. The smell of mold and stale air hit me immediately, but I pressed forward. I moved cautiously through the space, my senses on high alert. There were no signs of life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And then, I saw it. At the far end of the warehouse, partially hidden behind a stack of crates, was a large metal door. It wasn't marked, and there was nothing to indicate what it led to, but I knew this was it. This was the place where the legacy, the secret my great-grandfather had been guarding, was buried. I approached the door cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. It was locked, but the key from the chest fit perfectly. I turned it and heard the faint click of the lock releasing. The door creaked open, revealing a small room beyond. Inside, there was a table, covered in dust, with several documents scattered on it. But what caught my eye wasn't the papers. It was the large, ornate box sitting in the center of the table. The box was made of wood, with intricate carvings etched into its surface. It looked old, but the craftsmanship was unmatched. I approached it slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was the final piece. I reached for the box, and as I lifted the lid, I realized that everything had led me here. Inside, I found what I had been searching for, more than just a legacy, more than just a treasure. It was the truth, the key to my family's past, and everything was about to change. I stood there in the dimly lit room, staring at the ornate wooden box in my hands. The moment felt surreal, as though everything that had led me to this point was a lifetime away. My heart was racing, and my breath was shallow as I slowly lifted the lid, revealing what was inside. The contents of the box were more than I had ever hoped for. Inside were a stack of old documents, a few more faded photographs, and, most surprisingly, a heavy metal key, intricately designed. I felt the weight of it in my palm, and the significance of what I held in my hands settled into my bones. This was no ordinary key. It was a key to something far more valuable, something that could unravel the mysteries of my past. I carefully pulled out the stack of documents first, feeling the brittle paper under my fingers. The letters were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As I began reading, the story of my family's legacy unfolded before me. The Brotherhood was more than just a name. It was a secret society, a network of powerful individuals who had shaped the course of history, both in the shadows and in plain sight. My great-grandfather had been a key figure in this organization, and the documents outlined his role in protecting a series of ancient artifacts that had been hidden away for centuries. The artifacts, I learned, were not just valuable. They held the power to change the course of history itself. And now, it seemed, the responsibility had fallen on me. As I absorbed the weight of the information, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This wasn't just about family history. It was about a dangerous game that had been played for generations, and I had just been thrust into it. I looked back at the photographs, each one depicting a moment in time, moments of people I didn't recognize, yet somehow felt connected to. Some were in black and white, others in color, but all had one thing in common. Each person was part of the Brotherhood. And in every picture, the same symbol appeared in the background. A ring with an eye in the center, the same symbol my great-grandfather had worn in his photograph. I paused, my thoughts racing. This symbol, this ring, it was more than just a mark of membership. It was a sign of power, of protection. The Brotherhood had been protecting something far greater than artifacts. They had been guarding a secret, one that had to stay hidden, no matter the cost. My thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. I hadn't heard anyone approach, but I wasn't alone. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was tall, with dark hair and a face that was both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. He wore a long coat, and his presence seemed to fill the room. I didn't know who he was, but I could feel the weight of his gaze. "You found it," he said, his voice low and calm. His eyes locked onto the box in my hands. I didn't respond right away. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the situation. How had he found me? And what did he want? "You have no idea what you're holding," he continued. "That box, those documents, the key, it's all part of something far bigger than you can understand." I didn't like the sound of that. My grip on the box tightened. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady but with an edge of suspicion. The man smiled. but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, calculated. "I'm someone who's been looking for this," he said, taking a step forward. "And I'm not the only one." The weight of his words hit me like a punch. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I knew enough to understand that this was far from over. I had just unlocked a door to something dangerous, and there were others who wanted what I had found. The key, the box, the secrets of my family, they were all part of a much larger puzzle. And now, it seemed, I was the one holding the final piece. I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me to run, to get out of there, but I couldn't. Not yet. There was too much at stake. I looked at the man, my eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice hardening. "I want what's mine," he replied. "And I suggest you hand it over before it's too late." I didn't answer him right away. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with tension. I didn't trust this man, but I knew he wasn't alone. There were others out there, waiting, and they were all after the same thing I had just uncovered. The question was, could I trust myself to navigate this dangerous world? Or was I already too far in to turn back? The man took another step forward, but I backed away, my hand instinctively moving to the gun tucked beneath my jacket. "You won't get it that easily," I said, my voice low and steady. The man stopped, his eyes studying me for a moment before he spoke again. "We'll see about that," he said. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, holding the box and the secrets of my family's legacy. I knew one thing for sure. The game had just begun. I stood there, the weight of the man's words still hanging in the air. "We'll see about that." His cold smile had faded, and I couldn't help but feel the shift in the atmosphere. The room had grown colder, and the silence was suffocating. I wasn't alone anymore. Whoever he was, whatever this brotherhood was, I was in deeper than I had ever anticipated. I closed the box and tucked it back into my bag, my mind racing. This wasn't just about my family's past anymore. It was about something much bigger, something that could destroy everything I thought I knew. I needed to move quickly. The man had warned me, but there was no turning back now. I was already tangled in the web. I grabbed my jacket, pulling it on as I hurried out of the room. The heavy footsteps I had heard earlier weren't in my imagination. They had been real, and they were still fresh in my mind. Whoever that man was, he wasn't alone. I needed to get to the bike, to find some kind of safety, and figure out what my next move would be. But as I reached the door, I froze. A shadow moved just beyond the doorway, and my heart stopped. My eyes darted to the side, and that's when I saw him, another man, standing just a few feet away. He was tall, built like a wall, wearing a leather jacket with a patch I recognized from the photographs. Hell's Angels. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These were the people my great-grandfather had been involved with. These were the men who guarded the secrets, the treasures, the power. And they were here for the same thing I was now holding. The man didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching me with cold eyes. I didn't know whether he was friend or foe, but I wasn't about to wait around to find out. I reached for my gun, tucked under my jacket, but before I could react, the man spoke. "You don't want to do that." His voice was calm, steady, and for a moment, it felt like he could see right through me. "Put the gun down. We're not here to fight." His words didn't make sense. Everything in me screamed to run, to get out, but something about the way he spoke made me hesitate. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice low, every muscle in my body tensed for a fight. The man didn't flinch. "Name's Clark," he said simply. "I'm here to help." I didn't trust him, not one bit, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't lying. He stepped closer, lowering his hands to show he wasn't armed. "You're in deeper than you think, kid," he said. "The Brotherhood isn't just some group of guys looking for treasure. They're part of something much bigger, a legacy that's been passed down for generations. Your great-grandfather knew this, and now you're caught in the middle of it." I shook my head, trying to clear the confusion. "What are you talking about? I don't even know what this is." Clark took a deep breath and ran a hand through his short hair. "It's complicated, but trust me, they're not just after the artifacts. They're after the power, the control, and you've got something they want. The Brotherhood is looking for you, and they won't stop until they get what's theirs." I took a step back, my mind spinning. I didn't ask for this. I just want answers. Clark's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something resembling empathy. "I know, but it's not just about you. It's about everything your family was involved in. There's a reason your great-grandfather kept this secret, and now it's your turn to protect it." I didn't know whether to believe him. My head was reeling, and I felt like I was caught in a storm, tossed around by forces I couldn't control. But as much as I wanted to turn and run, I knew I couldn't. The key, the box, the map, they had all led me here. I couldn't back out now. What do I need to do? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Clark gave me a nod. First, we need to get out of here. We'll talk more on the way, but we have to move fast. The Brotherhood's already onto you, and they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to get what they want. I didn't hesitate this time. Clark wasn't wrong. I wasn't alone in this anymore, and I needed help. But who else could I trust? As we made our way to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just shifted. I was in too deep to get out, and whatever was coming next, it was going to change everything. We stepped into the night, the cold air biting at my skin, and I knew that this was just the beginning. There was no going back now. I could feel the cold air biting at my skin as we moved through the night, my heart racing, mind spinning. Clark walked beside me, silent but steady, his presence a strange comfort in the midst of everything that was happening. We hadn't said much since we left the warehouse, but his words still echoed in my head. The Brotherhood is already onto you, and they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to get what they want. The gravity of it all was starting to settle in. I wasn't just holding a key to some hidden family secret. I was holding the key to something far more dangerous. As we made our way down the dimly lit street, I felt the weight of it all pressing on me. This wasn't just about my family's history. It was about power, control, and a legacy that had been buried for decades. And now, I was in the middle of it. I glanced over at Clark, who seemed to be scanning the surroundings, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow, looking for any signs of danger. It was clear he knew more than he was letting on. Where are we going? I asked, my voice low. He glanced at me briefly, his expression unreadable. To a safe house. We need to get out of the open. If they're after you, we can't afford to be seen. I didn't argue. If there was one thing I had learned in the past few hours, it was that Clark wasn't the type to explain himself. He just did what needed to be done. We kept walking, my mind racing with questions. What did the Brotherhood want? What had my great-grandfather gotten himself involved in? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do with the box, the key, and the journal? We reached an alley, and Clark motioned for me to follow him. I didn't hesitate. We slipped into the shadows, trying to stay out of sight, but something about the night made my skin crawl. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Clark led me to a nondescript door in the back of an old building. He knocked twice, paused, then knocked again. There was a brief moment of silence before the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her 40s, her face hardened with years of experience. She didn't speak at first, just looked me over, sizing me up. Is he the one? She asked Clark, her voice sharp. He nodded. He's the one. We need to move quickly. She stepped aside and motioned for us to come in. As we entered, I couldn't help but notice the room was dark, with only a few dim lights casting shadows on the walls. There was a small table in the center of the room, covered with maps, papers, and old books. Everything about the place screamed secrecy. Sit, the woman said, pointing to one of the chairs. I did as I was told, still feeling out of place, unsure of what was happening or who these people really were. Clark sat across from me, his eyes never leaving mine. The woman stood beside the table, her hands resting on the surface. I'm Lucy, she said, her tone cold but not unkind. And if you want to survive this, you need to listen closely. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. Survive what? I asked, my voice rough. Lucy met my gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly. The Brotherhood isn't just a group of men. They're part of something bigger, something that's been around for centuries. They're powerful, dangerous, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want. I swallowed hard. What do they want from me? She paused, her lips tightening. They want the key, the box, and everything your great-grandfather protected. They think you're the last link to it, and they won't hesitate to come after you to get it. I felt a chill run through me. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucy looked at me, her expression softening just slightly. We want to help you. But you need to understand one thing. There's no going back now. Once they know you have what they want, you're already marked. The only way out is to finish what your great-grandfather started. I could feel the weight of her words pressing on me, a heaviness that seemed to settle deep in my chest. I didn't know if I was ready for this. I had come looking for answers, but now, it felt like I had uncovered something I wasn't prepared for. How do I finish it? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. Lucy didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped over to the table and pulled out a map, spreading it out in front of me. This is where it starts, she said, pointing to a location marked with a red X. Your great-grandfather left clues, hidden paths, and locked doors. This is where you need to go next. It's the only way to stop the Brotherhood and protect what's left of your family's legacy. My mind was racing. The idea of going after more clues, more secrets, seemed insane. But the alternative was worse. If I didn't act, the Brotherhood would come for me, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I'm in, I said, my voice firm. Lucy nodded. Good. But remember, you can't trust anyone. Not even those you think you know. The Brotherhood has eyes everywhere. I stood up, feeling a surge of determination that I hadn't felt before. Whatever this was, whatever it had become, I wasn't going to back down. I had a legacy to protect, and it was time to fight for it. I stood in front of the map Lucy had laid out on the table, trying to take in all the details. Every part of me wanted to run, to leave this all behind and forget what I had stumbled into. But I couldn't. The feeling that my family's legacy, whatever it was now intertwined with my fate was too strong to ignore. Lucy's words echoed in my mind. There's no going back now. The Brotherhood had made sure of that. I took a deep breath and pointed to the location marked on the map. This is where we start, I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. Lucy nodded, her eyes focused on the map. Yes, this is where it all began. Your great-grandfather hid something here, a key part of the legacy. The Brotherhood will be watching, so we need to move fast. I felt a surge of determination. When do we leave? I asked. Now, she replied. I didn't hesitate. Clark and Lucy led the way as we headed for the door. As I stepped out into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than usual, and the air felt thicker. It was as if the world itself knew what was happening and was holding its breath. We moved quickly, staying in the cover of darkness, but the streets were eerily quiet. I had no idea where we were going, but I trusted Lucy and Clark. They knew what they were doing. They had to. As we approached an old building on the outskirts of town, Lucy motioned for us to stop. She glanced around, her eyes sharp, before slipping inside the alley beside the building. We followed her, keeping our footsteps silent. The building was run down, abandoned, and the place looked like it hadn't seen life in years. I was starting to feel the weight of the situation, the danger, the unknown. But I had to keep moving forward. I had to find the truth. Lucy stopped in front of an old metal door, her hand resting on the rusted handle. This is it, she whispered, turning to look at me. The entrance to what your great-grandfather hid. I nodded, my throat dry. My hand reached for the handle, and as I pushed the door open, the sound of creaking hinges echoed through the silence. Inside was dark, but I could make out the outlines of old furniture and dusty shelves. The air smelled stale, like it had been locked away. For far too long. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. We moved carefully, our footsteps muffled against the old, creaky wooden floorboards. Lucy led the way, and Clark stayed close behind me, his eyes darting back and forth. Every corner felt like it was hiding something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As we reached the back of the room, Lucy stopped in front of a large stone wall. I raised an eyebrow. What was this? This is it, she said, her voice low. Your great-grandfather hid the key here. I looked around, but there was nothing to indicate how we were supposed to find it. No signs, no clues, nothing. How do we get in? I asked. Lucy's eyes narrowed as she examined the wall. There's a mechanism, she said, her fingers tracing the cracks in the stone. It's hidden, but it's there. She pushed against one of the cracks, and with a low rumble, the stone wall shifted, revealing a hidden passage. My heart raced. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. But as we stepped into the passage, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something didn't feel right. The air was colder here, and the silence was deafening. I looked around, but all I saw were the same dark, stone walls. We kept moving, following the narrow path until we reached a small room. In the center of the room was an old pedestal, and on top of it sat a small, intricately carved box. I could feel the weight of it, the significance of it. This was what we were looking for. I approached the pedestal slowly, my hands trembling as I reached for the box. But just as my fingers brushed against it, I heard it, footsteps. At first, they were faint, distant, but they grew louder. Someone was coming. Clark's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. "We're not alone," he whispered. My heart pounded in my chest. It was too late to leave. The Brotherhood had found us. I turned to Lucy, but she was already moving toward the exit. "Go," she hissed, her voice filled with urgency. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the box, and with Clark following closely behind me, we ran. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, but I didn't dare look back. The footsteps were getting closer, and I knew they were. Just behind us. We had to get out. As we reached the entrance to the building, I heard the doors slam open. I didn't need to turn around to know they were right behind us. We burst out into the open air, running as fast as we could. The Brotherhood was closing in. We couldn't stop. Not now. I could hear them now, their footsteps pounding behind us, echoing through the alley. The Brotherhood wasn't just following us. They were closing in fast. I could feel the weight of the box in my hand, my fingers clutching it tighter with each step. We had to move faster. I glanced over at Clark, but his face was a mask of concentration, his eyes fixed ahead. He knew the urgency. He knew what was at stake. The night had grown colder, the air thick with tension. We turned a corner, my breath coming in short gasps as I tried to keep up with Clark's long strides. The city streets seemed deserted, but I knew better than to assume we were alone. The Brotherhood had eyes everywhere. I could feel them watching, lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, Clark stopped, his arm shooting out to stop me. He held up his hand, signaling for silence. We both froze, straining to hear. Footsteps. Several of them. I cursed under my breath. They were closer than I thought. Clark's eyes flickered to the left, where a narrow passageway led deeper into the city. Without a word, he pulled me toward it. We darted down the alley, the walls closing in on us as the sounds of pursuit grew louder. We didn't have much time. The passageway was tight, winding, and poorly lit. But it was our only chance. As we reached the end of the alley, I saw what Clark was leading us toward, an old, abandoned warehouse. It was barely standing, the walls crumbling and the windows shattered, but it was a place to hide. We rushed inside, and Clark slammed the door shut behind us, the sound of it echoing in the empty building. We were safe, for now, but I knew it was only temporary. They would find us. They always found you. "We need to move fast," Clark said, his voice low. "They're going to be looking for you, and they won't stop until they get what they want." I nodded my mind. Racing. The box, the map, the Brotherhood, all of it was closing in on us. I had no idea what was inside the box, but I knew one thing for sure. It was more than just a family secret. It was a key to something that had been hidden for decades, something the Brotherhood wanted badly enough to kill for. I had to keep it safe. But at what cost? "What's the plan?" I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Clark glanced at the box in my hands, his expression hardening. "We need to get to the safe house. There's someone there who can help." I didn't ask who. At this point, it didn't matter. We were in this together, and I needed to trust him. "Let's go," I said, determination setting in. Clark led the way again, his steps sure and quick. We moved through the warehouse, careful not to make any noise. The sound of our footsteps on the cracked concrete was drowned out by the storm raging outside. The wind howled through the broken windows, and the rain beat against the roof, but inside, it was silent, too silent. As we reached the back door, I felt it, the unmistakable sense that something was wrong. My heart skipped a beat. I turned to Clark. "Something's off," I said. He glanced back at me, his face tense. "We don't have time," he muttered. But I wasn't so sure. We pushed through the door, stepping into the alley behind the warehouse. And that's when I saw them. Two figures, standing in the shadows. I didn't recognize them, but I could tell they weren't friendly. They stepped forward, blocking the only exit. Clark's body tensed beside me, his hand subtly moving toward the gun at his waist. I did the same, my fingers brushing the cool metal of my own weapon. The figures didn't say a word, but the intent in their eyes was clear. They were here for the box. The Brotherhood had found us, just like I knew they would. "We're not giving it to you," Clark said, his voice cold, steady. The two men didn't flinch. Instead, one of them reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. "A tracker. You're not in control here," the man said, his voice low, almost mocking. I felt the blood drain from my face. Hey, tracker. They'd planted it on us. They knew where we were. They had us cornered. I could feel the panic rising, my thoughts racing. But I couldn't let it show. I had the box, and I wasn't going to let them take it. You want it? I said, stepping forward. You'll have to kill me first. The man with the tracker smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile that said they were prepared to do whatever it took. I didn't have much time. The rain was pouring down harder now, the thunder crashing like the roar of an approaching storm. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. The battle for the legacy, the power that had been hidden for so long, was just beginning. I could feel the weight of the gun in my hand, my fingers wrapped tightly around the cold metal. Clark was beside me, his body tense, ready for whatever came next. The two men in front of us didn't make a move, but I could see the glint of something dangerous in their eyes. They were waiting. I knew they were only moments away from making their move, and we had no choice but to act first. I glanced at Clark, but he didn't look at me. He knew what needed to be done. We don't want any trouble, Clark said, his voice calm but firm. But if you want the box, you're going to have to take it from us. The man with the tracker in his hand smirked, but his eyes were cold, calculating. You think you can stop us? You're already too deep, kid. The Brotherhood has eyes everywhere. His words hung in the air like a threat, and I could feel the pressure building. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't backing down. Clark and I had come too far to give up now. I steadied my breathing and tightened my grip on the gun. We weren't going to make it out of this without a fight. The man with the tracker took a step forward, raising his hand as if to signal for us to stand down. But I wasn't about to wait for him to make the first move. I fired, the sound of the gunshot deafening in the silence of the alley. The bullet missed, but it was enough to make them hesitate. The other man moved to draw his weapon, but Clark was faster. He lunged forward, knocking the gun out of the man's hand before he had a chance to fire. The two men stumbled back, surprised by the speed and intensity of our reaction. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before the storm. That's your warning, Clark said, his voice low and steady. Walk away now, and we won't have to do this. The man with the tracker looked at his partner, a silent exchange passing between them. They weren't backing down, not yet. I could see the calculation in their eyes. They were trying to figure out their next move, but we weren't giving them the chance. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation as we stood there, ready for whatever came next. You think this is over? The man with the tracker sneered. You think you can run from us? The Brotherhood won't stop until they get what's theirs. His words hung in the air, and I could feel my stomach tighten. This was bigger than I had imagined. But I wasn't going to let them intimidate me. We're not running, I said, my voice steady. And we're not giving you the box. The man raised his gun again, but before he could fire, Clark acted. He rushed forward, knocking the gun aside and delivering a sharp punch to the man's stomach. The man gasped for air, his grip on the gun faltering. I didn't waste any time. I lunged, grabbing the weapon and pushing it out of his hands. The man staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The other man, still reeling from the punch, started to reach for his own gun, but I was faster. I pointed the gun at him, my finger on the trigger. Not another step, I warned, my voice cold. He hesitated, then slowly raised his hands in surrender. You think you've won? The first man spat, still clutching his stomach. This is far from over. The Brotherhood has already marked you. You can't escape us. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The last thing I wanted was to get caught in a power struggle between the Brotherhood and whoever else was involved in this mess. But I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't take control, now, if I didn't finish this, I would never be free. Stay down, I said, my voice hard, and we might let you walk away. The two men glared at me, their pride bruised, but they didn't make another move. Clark and I exchanged a brief look, a silent understanding passing between us. This wasn't over yet. The Brotherhood was still out there, and they would come for us. But right now, we had the upper hand. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we had a chance to end this. We stepped away from the men, keeping the gun trained on them as we made our way back into the shadows. The alley was silent again, but it felt different. We had taken control, and now, it was time to find out what the Brotherhood really wanted. We couldn't outrun them forever, but we could fight back. And this fight wasn't over yet. I kept my eyes on the men, who were still kneeling on the ground, their hands raised in surrender. Their pride was broken, but the danger wasn't over. The Brotherhood would not stop just because we'd had one small victory. I could feel the weight of the box still tucked under my arm, its contents as much a mystery as ever. Clark stood beside me, his posture tense, his gaze flicking to the street behind us. Always alert, always ready. We had no time to waste. "We need to get out of here," he said quietly, but there was no mistaking the urgency in his voice. We didn't wait for the men to recover. We turned and slipped into the darkness, moving quickly through the alleyways. The rain was still coming down in sheets, making it harder to hear anything from a distance. But my mind was still racing. The Brotherhood was powerful, organized, and they had people everywhere. We couldn't stay in one place for long. "Where are we going?" I asked Clark as we turned another corner, weaving through the maze of back streets. He didn't answer at first, but I saw him glance over at me, his eyes narrowing. "We've got a contact who can help us. Someone who knows more about the Brotherhood's operations." My heart skipped. I'd heard stories of shadowy figures in this kind of world, people who were always in the background, pulling strings. But the idea of trusting someone else, after everything that had happened, made my stomach twist. "And you trust this person?" I asked, my voice skeptical. Clark didn't hesitate. "I don't trust anyone, but we don't have a choice. This is bigger than us. If we don't figure out what they want with this legacy, we won't make it out of this alive." His words hit me hard, but I knew he was right. Every step we took, every corner we turned, we were getting closer to whatever dark truth the Brotherhood was protecting, and closer to the people who would stop at nothing to keep it hidden. We reached a building on the edge of town, a rundown building with a small, dimly lit sign that read Moonlight Salvage. It looked like any other abandoned warehouse, the windows boarded up, the doors rusted and half-broken. But Clark moved with confidence, as if he'd been here before. He knocked 3 times on the metal door, waited, then knocked 2 more times. A small peephole slid open, and a pair of eyes stared out at us. Clark didn't speak. Instead, he nodded, and the door slowly creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil, rust, and something else, something stale. The lights were dim, flickering occasionally, casting long shadows on the walls. The space was cluttered with metal scraps, old machinery, and various pieces of discarded equipment. A tall figure stood in the back, silhouetted against the faint light. As we entered, the door shut behind us with a sharp bang. "Clark," the figure said, its voice low but unmistakably familiar. "I didn't think I'd see you again." The man stepped forward, revealing a weathered face, sharp features, and a scar that ran down the side of his cheek. He was older than Clark, probably in his late 50s, but there was no mistaking the calm, calculating energy that radiated from him. "I need your help," Clark said, his tone urgent. "We've got a problem." The man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "And who's this?" he asked, his gaze shifting from Clark to me. Clark turned to me. "This is him. The one I told you about. He's carrying the key." The man's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "So it's true. You're the one," he muttered. I didn't know what he meant by that, but it didn't matter. I had to know what was going on. "What is this? What do they want with me?" I asked, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. The man took a step closer. "The Brotherhood has been after your family's legacy for years," he began. "And now that you've found it, they'll stop at nothing to take it from you. The key you're holding isn't just a key to a vault. It's a key to something much more dangerous. Something that, if unlocked, could shift the balance of power in this entire world." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean by shift the balance of power?" The man sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "The Brotherhood has been guarding something far more than treasure. They've been guarding a secret, one that could change everything. And your great-grandfather was involved in hiding it. He didn't just protect it, he buried it. If you unlock that secret, they'll do anything to get it. So what's the plan?" I asked, feeling the pressure of everything piling up. "You need to get out of town. They know you're here. They know you have the key. If you stay in one place too long, they'll find you." The man turned toward a table cluttered with old maps and documents. He pointed to one of the maps on the table. "There's a place out in the mountains, away from everything. If you can get there, you might be able to hide long enough to figure out what this key unlocks." I looked at the map, feeling a surge of determination. "I'm not running anymore. I said, my voice steady. I'm going to finish this. Whatever it takes. The man studied me for a long moment before nodding. Then you'll need all the help you can get. Clark and the man exchanged a brief look, and without another word, Clark reached into his jacket and pulled out a second gun, handing it to me. This is going to get harder before it gets easier. I took the gun, my grip firm as I tucked it into my jacket. Then let's get started. We were about to walk into the heart of the storm, but for the first time, I felt like I might actually have a chance to fight back. I could feel the tension building with each step we took out of the warehouse. The weight of the gun tucked under my jacket felt heavier now, as if it was a constant reminder of how far I had been pulled into this world. Clark walked beside me, the grim determination etched on his face, and the man we had just met, still in the shadows, kept pace with us, his eyes scanning the area. We hadn't spoken since the plan was set. No one needed to say much. Our next move was clear. We had to get to the mountains, away from the prying eyes of the Brotherhood, to figure out what the key unlocked. The map we had was old, weathered, but it was all we had. And every step we took away from the city felt like a step closer to the truth, but also further into danger. The streets of the town were quiet now, too quiet. The usual hum of the city had been replaced with an eerie silence, as though the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I could feel eyes on us. The Brotherhood had eyes everywhere, and they knew we were out there. The road to the mountains was long and winding, and we couldn't risk taking the main highways. Clark had insisted we take a detour through back roads, remote, desolate, and away from prying eyes. We had to avoid the checkpoints, the surveillance. There was no room for error. As the car bumped along the rugged road, the landscape began to shift. The city was far behind us now, replaced by dense woods and jagged hills. The feeling of isolation crept in, and with it, a deeper sense of unease. We were going into uncharted territory, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. The further we traveled, the more I felt like we were heading towards something I couldn't fully comprehend. The shadows that had followed me for so long were finally catching up, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared for what we might find. We had been driving for hours, the only sound in the car being the hum of the engine and the occasional rustling of trees outside. Clark, who had been the one driving, was focused, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The man we had met earlier had fallen silent, but I could feel his presence in the back seat. His eyes were always moving, always watching, even as the night settled around us. It wasn't until we hit a narrow pass that Clark finally spoke again. "We're almost there," he said, his voice low, but there was something else in his tone. A warning. Stay alert. This is where it gets dangerous. I didn't ask what he meant. I had learned not to question Clark. He was used to living in the shadows, to the constant threat of danger. But this wasn't just about surviving the night anymore. It was about the legacy that had been hidden for so long, and the key that held the answers. It wasn't just about us anymore. The Brotherhood was closing in. We had to stay ahead of them, or we'd never get out alive. The mountain road twisted and turned, the trees thick around us like they were closing in. I could barely make out the path ahead, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, though. It wasn't just the silence of the night. It was the sense that something was out there, waiting. As we approached a clearing, Clark slowed the car. He motioned for us to be quiet, and I instinctively held my breath, listening for any sound. The faint rustling of leaves, the wind howling through the trees. But then, I heard something else, a low growl, distant but unmistakable. Clark's eyes locked on the rearview mirror. "We're not alone," he muttered under his breath. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced out of the window, trying to make sense of the shadows moving in the trees. But I couldn't see anything clearly. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. Something was coming. "Get out," Clark ordered. His voice was sharp, commanding. Without another word, he cut the engine, and we all got out of the car, moving quickly but silently. The clearing ahead of us was empty, save for the rustling of the trees, but I knew we weren't alone. Clark motioned for us to follow him. He led us through the thick woods, moving quickly and deliberately, as though he knew exactly where we were going. I couldn't keep up with his pace, but I didn't dare fall behind. We had to keep moving, no matter the cost. The growl I had heard earlier grew louder, and then the crunching of leaves and twigs underfoot grew nearer. We were being hunted, but by whom? Or what? Clark reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife, handing it to me without a word. The cold steel felt heavy in my hand, but I didn't question him. The night was closing in, and I could feel the threat coming closer. As we pushed forward, I realized something. This was it. The place we were heading to wasn't just a destination. It was the point of no return. Whatever was out there, whatever the Brotherhood was hiding, it would soon be revealed. And there was no turning back. We had come too far to stop now. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as we crept through the woods, every sense heightened. The growls were closer now, unmistakable and terrifying. It was like nothing I had ever heard before, deep, guttural, and primal. Clark's pace never faltered, but I could sense the urgency in his movements, his body tense with anticipation. We were no longer in control. We had walked straight into a trap, and now, there was no turning back. The dark trees around us seemed to close in, the shadows twisting and shifting, but there was no sign of what was hunting us. Just the growing sound of movement, the crunching of leaves underfoot. I gripped the knife in my hand, the cold metal sending a chill through my fingers. Clark had given it to me without a second thought. His expression hardened as if he expected me to use it. But against whatever we were up against, I had no idea if it would be enough. "Stay close," Clark whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, but I wasn't sure how long we could keep moving. Every direction we turned seemed to bring us closer to the growls, closer to whatever predator was stalking us through the night. We reached a small clearing, the moonlight finally filtering through the trees. In the center of the clearing, a large stone structure rose up from the ground, ancient and weathered. The stone was covered in moss and ivy, and its shape was unlike anything I had seen before. Clark stopped, his eyes scanning the area. "This is it," he said, barely more than a whisper. "The entrance to what your grandfather hid." The words didn't make sense, not with the growling getting closer. I looked at him, trying to understand. "Are you telling me we're just going to walk into that?" I said, my voice tinged with disbelief. Clark's gaze softened for a moment, but there was no hesitation in his response. "We don't have a choice." The growls had stopped, but the silence was more terrifying than the noise. The predator was close. Too close. We moved toward the stone structure, the earth beneath our feet soft and wet from the rain. I could feel the cold air biting at my skin, and every step seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. As we reached the stone doorway, Clark motioned for me to follow. The door was heavy, thick, and ancient, but with Clark's strength, it creaked open, revealing a dark corridor inside. I hesitated for a moment, but Clark was already moving forward, leading the way into the unknown. The passage was narrow, the walls made of cold stone that seemed to press in on us. As we ventured deeper, the air grew colder, heavier, and the sense of something watching us never left. We reached a small chamber at the end of the tunnel. The space was barely lit, but there, on a pedestal in the center of the room, sat a large, ornate box. The box was unlike anything I had seen before, its surface intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. It was ancient, powerful, and it felt like it was calling to me. This was what we had come for. Clark stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the box. "This is it," he said, his voice almost reverent. "This is the key to everything." I stepped forward cautiously, but before I could reach out, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You should not have come here." The voice was deep, gravelly, and it seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I spun around, my heart racing. A figure stepped out from the shadows, tall and cloaked in dark robes, his face hidden by a hood. The air seemed to grow colder still. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. The figure didn't answer immediately, but his presence was overwhelming. "You have unlocked the secret that should have remained buried," he said, his voice sending a shiver down my spine. "The Brotherhood has protected this for centuries, and now you are the one who has unearthed it." I glanced at Clark, but he stood frozen, his eyes narrowed as if he had expected this. "You're the one they were after," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The man in the cloak tilted his head. "I am not the one you should fear," he replied cryptically. "It is what lies within that box that will determine your fate." Clark stepped forward, his jaw set. "We didn't come this far to turn back. We're taking it." The man's laugh echoed through the chamber, cold and hollow. "You may try," he said, "but there are others who will stop at nothing to take it from you." and they will succeed. The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, and the realization hit hard. This was bigger than I had ever imagined. The Brotherhood, the legacy, the key, it was all connected to something far more dangerous than I could comprehend. The figure moved closer, but Clark stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. "You're not taking it," Clark said, his voice firm, unwavering. The man in the cloak studied us for a long moment, then took a step back. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "But remember, the past has a way of coming back, and when it does, it will bring the storm with it." With those final words, he faded into the shadows, leaving us standing there in the darkened chamber. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of the box in my hands, the power that it represented. It wasn't over yet. Whatever the Brotherhood was after, whatever was locked inside that box, we had to face it. But one thing was clear, we weren't running anymore. We were going to end this, once and for all. In this gripping tale, immerse yourself in the world of Hell Angels stories, where danger and intrigue intertwine as the protagonist embarks on a journey to uncover his family's dark legacy. From mysterious figures in shadowy alleyways to unexpected alliances, this thrilling narrative reveals how one man's discovery of an ancient family secret leads to a fight for survival against a powerful Brotherhood. The protagonist must navigate a treacherous world where the line between friend and foe becomes increasingly blurred. With each step, he gets closer to unlocking the truth, only to find that the Brotherhood is always one step ahead. As he faces relentless pursuit, uncover hidden truths, and fights to protect his family's legacy, these Hell Angels stories capture the essence of tension and suspense. The key to everything lies within the box he carries, but with enemies closing in, the fight is far from over. Will he succeed in protecting the legacy, or will the Brotherhood claim it for themselves? This is a story that keeps you on the edge of your seat, revealing shocking twists and a legacy of power, control, and secrets hidden for generations. Dive into the world of Hell Angels stories where every decision could lead to life or death, and where the past never truly stays buried. Follow the protagonist as he faces the dangers of uncovering dark truths in a world filled with uncertainty and treachery, and discover what happens when one man fights to change his fate. This intense journey will leave you questioning who to trust, as Hell Angels stories unfold and new dangers emerge at every turn.